Hey everyone, this week we're at Retro Jake's in downtown Richmond, Indiana. Now I've been wanting to check this place out for quite a while, but just haven't been able to get back out here due to the weather. Retro Jake's actually used to be located in the Richmond Bargain Center, which is like a flea market slash furniture store kind of place. In fact, it's set pretty much right next to Dave's Wrestling Vault, which we covered last fall. I was actually going to get a video of it while I was there, but I was told that they were about to move to their brand new location downtown, so I figured I'd just wait until they relocated. And while it took a few extra months to get back out here, we finally made it. So let's see what all Retro Jake's has to offer. The store itself is located in one of those old cavernous buildings that dot small town downtown areas just about everywhere. But they've done a great job of filling the space with a ton of games out on the floor to look through. And not just 600,000 copies of old sports games like Madden's or NBA 2K or stuff like that, but a lot of stuff that you'd actually want to browse through. Like lately, I've been pretty close to starting an in-box Genesis collection, and Retro Jake's was tempting me pretty hard with a fairly large amount of cheap in-box games sitting around. There's also a few games here that I used to rent a lot when I was a kid, like Skitchin' here. I don't know if you guys have ever played Skitchin', but it was kind of like Road Rash, but with rollerblades, and a whole lot of 90s attitude to go along with it.
Get radical in Skitchin' from Electronic Arts.
So basically the most 90s console game that you could imagine that isn't Sonic the Hedgehog. And while I really don't collect old PlayStation games, I always browse through them just to see if there's anything that I remember playing hanging around. Unfortunately, the one that I remember the most that I see is Star Wars Masters of the Terraskazi, and I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right. This one was another attempt to turn literally everything into a 3D fighting game back in the 90s. And of course, as you can imagine, most ended up being a complete disaster. And while Masters of the Terraskazi isn't the worst fighting game I've ever played, it definitely isn't very good. Though it is hard to deny that flailing around with various Star Wars characters in a fighting game wasn't fun for at least a rental or two. Now, I never cared much for the Wii U back when it was out, but I was recently gifted a Wii U by someone that bought it back when it came out and played Mario Kart on it once before it was entombed into their closet, until now at least. So I've actually been paying attention to these Wii U sections just to see how prices are these days. I never really looked too much into this library before, so there may be some fun stuff to check out that never made it over to the Switch. And if anyone has any suggestions, then please leave a comment down below to help me along in the future. There wasn't much going on as far as loose Super NES games on the rack, but they did have a couple of in-box systems sitting out, which I always enjoy seeing, along with a Super Scope that I don't think anyone has ever wanted. The one thing that did get my attention was this old baseball bat controller called the Batter Up that I totally remember seeing as a kid. Of course, this was meant for baseball games, but there really wasn't any sort of motion control inside of it. It was basically just a disc that moves whenever you swing the bat, which then acts as a button press. It was advertised poorly, didn't work like you'd think it would, and was way too expensive for what's essentially a fancy-looking controller. Still though, I always wanted one since I was way into baseball as a kid, but that $70 asking price was a bit too much when I could literally just go buy a whole new game. Besides some of the yellowest Super NESs that I've ever seen, the cases didn't contain too much that made me want to drop a ton of money on, besides maybe this TurboGrafx arcade stick. They did seem to have an influx of Sega Model 3s though, since this is like the most I've ever seen in one place. The Sega Model 3 was like a cheap mini Genesis that was released in the late 90s to try and squeeze a few more bucks out of the Genesis library. And while I always liked the smaller size, these were super cheap consoles, and they're not compatible with various add-ons, and even a few games, so I just always stayed away from them. Oh, and there's also an Atari Jaguar sitting up here that you probably shouldn't buy. There's also a good amount of games lining the wall behind the register, but I'll let you all browse these for a second to see if there's anything that you've been wanting or even remember playing back in the day. But all of that is just half of what Retro Jake's has to offer, as there's an entire arcade attached to the side of this place, and this is the real deal arcade experience. And I say experience because it genuinely does have that old school 80s arcade feel to it. We've been to more than a few stores with a large selection of arcade games to play, but they're all mostly well lit with more of an amusement park feel to them. Retro Jake's Arcade is what it used to feel like to walk into a mall arcade when I was a kid. It's dark, it's loud, and the only things you can really see are the arcade screens and the marquees. Actually, someone asked me not too long ago why arcade cabinets had their marquees lit at all. Well, this is why. Arcades used to be a dim, dark affair, so this is how you'd be able to see what games were around, since usually someone was standing right in front of the screen. But anyway, yeah, this place feels like an arcade, and honestly the only thing missing is the constant smell of cigarette smoke that hung around arcades in the 80s, though that's probably for the best. This area even has a snack counter where you can order food and a small area where you can sit down and chill. This is exactly what I would have wanted for a birthday party when I was a kid. It's just such a cool scene. As for the arcade itself, there's a really great selection of old and new sitting around. It's got the classics that everyone knows like Street Fighter and Turtles, but it's also got some stuff that I've never even seen in arcades here in the States before, like this amazing Rambo cabinet. These guns alone weighed like 5 pounds. It's crazy. I wish I had more time to explore because I'm sure there were more games in here that I completely passed by. Even editing this video, I'm noticing some that I missed while I was there. I'll definitely have to go back regardless because you just don't see stuff like this anymore in this kind of setting. It's totally worth checking out Retro Jake's just for the arcade alone. But I think that's gonna do it for Retro Jake's. Overall, this is a fun little store, and you can probably find some great games if you want to do a little digging. Plus, they've got enough in-box games to make the trip worth it if you're collecting those. And obviously, the arcade seals the deal. If you're around the Richmond area, then definitely this is worth checking out, since really there's not much else in the city as it is. But if you're around Indianapolis or the Dayton, Ohio areas and are willing to make a day trip out of it, I think you'll have a great time. We came over on a random Saturday morning and had a ton of fun poking around. Real quick though, I just wanted to say thank you to the Retro Jake staff for letting us come in and put up with us while we're getting video. For now though, we're going to be heading back to Indy to see what we can find around there. So check back next week for another retro game and toy hunt.